My boss said I was the worst she ever had, then broke down and said, "I love you." My boss looked me dead in the eyes in front of 14 coworkers and said I was the worst she ever had, the single worst hire in her entire career. She didn't whisper it. She didn't pull me aside. She said it out loud, mid-meeting, mid-sentence, like the words had been loaded in a chamber, and she'd been waiting for the perfect moment to pull the trigger. But here's what makes this story different from every humiliation you've ever heard. That same boss, that same cold, sharp, untouchable woman who broke me down in front of everyone I worked with, would one day stand in her own office, mascara running, hands shaking, voice cracking, and say 3 words she'd been terrified to say for months. I love you. My name is Garrett Hollis. I'm 41 years old. I'm a structural engineer. But before I ever walked into that conference room, I had already buried my newborn son who never took his first breath, and watched cancer take my wife less than 2 years later. I had nothing left. No family waiting at home. No voice on the other end of the phone. Just an empty apartment and a job that was the only reason I still got dressed in the morning. And my boss, Meredith Calloway, the most powerful woman in that building, chose me as her target. She tore my work apart. She crushed me publicly. She called me the worst she ever had, like it was a fact she'd confirmed a long time ago. But what would make a boss break down a man she barely knew? Why would she say I was the worst when my work was saving her biggest project? What was she hiding behind all that cruelty? And how does a woman who destroyed you in front of everyone end up on her knees, in tears, telling you she loves you? I need to take you back to the beginning. Not the meeting, before that, before Meredith, before the job, back to when my life still had a pulse. Her name was Claire. We met at a hardware store arguing over the last cordless drill on the shelf. She wanted it for a bookcase. I wanted it for a deck I was building. We went back and forth for 5 minutes like 2 lawyers fighting over evidence, and then she laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, the kind that starts in the belly and doesn't ask permission. She said, "How about you build my bookcase and I'll help you with your deck and we split the drill?" I said yes before she finished the sentence. That was Claire. She walked into chaos and made it make sense. I proposed 8 months later on that same deck with sawdust still in the cracks between the boards. She cried so hard she couldn't say yes. She just nodded and tackled me into the railing. Claire was warmth. That's the only word big enough. She hummed when she cooked. She cried at dog commercials. She pressed her hand against strangers' shoulders in grocery stores when they looked sad, like kindness was something she couldn't turn off even if she tried. For 6 years, she was my home. Not the apartment, not the furniture. Her. Then we started trying for a baby. It took 2 years, 24 months of hoping, of quiet doctor visits, of negative tests that felt like small funerals. But then one Tuesday morning, Claire sat on the bathroom floor holding a test in both hands, tears pouring down her face, and she looked up at me and said, "We made a person, Garrett. We painted the nursery sage green. We picked a name, Elliot James Hollis. We bought a crib with a little mobile of wooden stars that played a lullaby when you wound it up. Claire would sit in the rocking chair we found at a flea market and talk to her belly, like Elliot was already listening. She'd narrate the whole day, what she ate, what song was on the radio, how his dad snored like a broken engine. I'd stand in the doorway and watch her and think, this is it. This is the life I was built for. But life doesn't care what you were built for. At 36 weeks, during a routine checkup, the nurse pressed the cruelty monitor to Claire's stomach and went quiet. She adjusted it, pressed again, called another nurse, then a doctor, then another doctor. And I stood there in that room watching my wife's face shift from confusion to fear to something I still don't have a word for, because some kinds of pain exist beyond language. Elliot was stillborn on a Wednesday afternoon. They placed him in Claire's arms, and he was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a full head of dark hair just like mine. He looked like he was sleeping. He looked like any second he'd open his eyes and see his mother's face for the first time. But he never did. Claire held him for 3 hours. She wouldn't let go. She rocked him and whispered to him and sang the same lullaby the wooden stars played. And I sat beside her with my hand on her back, completely useless, watching the strongest woman I'd ever known break into pieces so small I didn't know if they could ever fit back together. We buried our son on a Saturday. It rained. Claire wore a blue dress because she said blue was going to be his favorite color. I didn't ask how she knew. Mothers just know. After Elliot, something in Claire dimmed. Not all at once. Slowly. Like a lamp losing voltage. She stopped humming. She stopped laughing at commercials. She'd sit in the nursery in that rocking chair, staring at the empty crib, waiting for someone who was never coming. I tried everything. Therapy, trips, long conversations at 2 a.m. where I held her and told her we'd survive this. And some days she believed me. Some days she'd squeeze my hand and say, "We still have each other. That's enough." But grief is patient. It waits. And 14 months after we lost Elliot, Claire found a lump. Breast cancer. Stage 3. Aggressive. She fought like the woman she was. 8 months of chemo that stripped her down to bones and willpower. She lost her hair, her appetite, 30 pounds she didn't have to lose. But she'd still look at me from that hospital bed, face gray, arms bruised from the IV lines, and say, "Stop making that face, Garrett. I'm not done yet." But she was. Claire Hollis died on a Sunday morning. She was 37 years old. I was holding her hand when her breathing slowed, then softened, then stopped, like a song fading out that nobody wanted to end. I walked into the hallway and broke apart so quietly that a nurse passed me without noticing. Just like that, I was alone. No wife, no son, no future. Just an empty apartment with a sage green nursery I couldn't enter and a crib mobile I couldn't wind because the sound of that lullaby would have finished me. For 8 months, I barely existed. I didn't live. I maintained. I showered because hygiene required it. I ate because my body demanded it. I slept in 2-hour intervals because my mind wouldn't let me rest any longer. The apartment became a museum of everything I'd lost. Claire's coffee mug still in the cabinet. Elliot's ultrasound photo still on the fridge. A pair of tiny, hand-knitted blue booties that Claire's mother had made, tucked in a drawer because I couldn't display them, but I couldn't throw them away either. They were the only proof that my son had been real, that he'd been wanted, that someone had spent hours knitting something soft and blue for a little boy who never got to wear them. I took the job at Callaway and Wren Architecture because if I spent one more day alone in that apartment, I was going to disappear completely. The job wasn't ambition. It wasn't a career move. It was a life raft, something to grab onto, something that forced me to put on a shirt and pretend I was still a functioning human being. That's the man who walked into Meredith Callaway's firm. A man held together by routine and silence. A man who had already lost everything the world could take from him. But what I didn't know yet was that the worst was still coming. Not from grief this time. From a woman in high heels and a tailored blazer who would tear me apart in ways I never saw coming, but who would also eventually put me back together in ways I never thought possible. Meredith Callaway ran Callaway and Wren Architecture the way a general runs a war zone. She was 38, sharp-jawed, always in tailored blazers that fit like armor, heels that clicked on the marble floors like a countdown to someone's bad day. She had this way of entering a room that made every spine in it straighten, not out of respect, out of survival. She spoke in short, clipped sentences, like every word cost her money and she hated overspending. Her eyes could cut glass. Her silence could empty a room faster than a fire alarm. And from the very first day I walked into that firm, she chose me. Not chose like favored, chose like targeted. My drafts came back covered in so much red ink they looked like crime scenes. My proposals got dissected in meetings while everyone else's passed without a blink. She once made me redo a load-bearing analysis 3 times because of what she called an unacceptable lack of precision. The third version was identical to the first. She approved it, without a word. I told myself it was just her management style, that she pushed everyone this hard. But my coworker Derek Sims, the only honest man on that floor, killed that theory over coffee one afternoon. He leaned back in his chair, shook his head, and said, "Bro, she doesn't ride anyone else like this, not even close. Whatever you did to that woman, she wants you gone." But I hadn't done anything. I showed up early, I stayed late. I never complained. I brought solutions when everyone else brought excuses. And still, every morning I walked into that building, I could feel her eyes on me like crosshairs on a target. The worst part wasn't the criticism. I could handle criticism. Claire used to say I had skin thick enough to insulate a house. The worst part was the silence between the attacks. The way Meredith would pass my desk without acknowledging I existed. The way she'd address the whole room in a meeting, and her gaze would skip over me like I was a blank space in the seating chart. She never smiled at me, never asked how I was, never once treated me like a human being who might be carrying something heavier than a briefcase. But that day in the conference room, when she called me the worst hire she'd ever made in front of 14 people I had to face every single morning, something inside me didn't just crack, it shifted, like a foundation, deciding whether to hold or give way. I set the marker down. I closed my notebook, and I walked out of that room without a word. No slam, no sigh. Just footsteps on marble and the sound of Derek muttering behind me, "Yo, that was foul." Nobody followed me. I sat in my truck in the parking garage for 45 minutes, both hands on the steering wheel, engine off, staring at the concrete wall, replaying her voice in a loop that wouldn't stop. The worst hire I've ever made. I'd survived burying my son. I'd survived holding my wife's hand while she took her last breath. I'd survived waking up every morning in an apartment that echoed with voices that would never answer back. But something about being publicly destroyed by a woman I actually respected, a woman whose approval I'd been chasing without even realizing it, that hit a nerve I didn't know was still exposed. That evening I went home to silence. I heated up leftover soup, sat at a table built for two, ate alone, washed one bowl, one spoon, dried them, put them away. Stood in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the refrigerator hum, wondering when this had become the full extent of my life. I walked past the nursery door. It was closed. It was always closed. But I could still see it behind my eyelids, the sage-green walls, the wooden stars, the rocking chair where Claire used to sing. But I didn't open that door. I hadn't opened it in over a year, because some rooms hold so much grief that even the air inside them weighs more than you can carry. The next few weeks at the firm were brutal. Meredith never acknowledged what she'd said. She moved through the office the same way she always did. Controlled, precise, untouchable. As if humiliating me in front of my peers was just another line item on her Tuesday agenda. But the people around me changed. The younger associates avoided my eyes. Senior engineers gave me nods that felt like condolences at a funeral. Derek went full protective mode. If she pulls that again, I'm filing a complaint. I don't care if she owns the building. I shook my head. It's not worth it. He grabbed my arm. You're worth it, man. That's the part you keep forgetting. I didn't respond, but those words settled somewhere deep, deeper than I expected. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Thursday. Around 9 p.m., the office was a ghost town. I was still at my desk because Meredith had flagged a structural inconsistency in the east wing of the Meridian Tower project and wanted it resolved by morning. I pulled the files, ran the numbers again, and what I found made the audio blood drain from my face. The inconsistency wasn't a minor error. It was a critical flaw in the foundation load calculations. The east corner of the building was designed to carry 23% more stress than the frame could handle. In plain terms, if this building went up as drawn, it could eventually collapse. Not today, not next year. But under the right conditions, the right storm, the right shift in the earth, that corner would buckle, and people would be inside. The blueprints had already been submitted to the city for approval. I sat there staring at the numbers, heart hammering, and I made a decision. I didn't call Meredith. I didn't email anyone. I just worked. I recalculated the entire East Wing foundation from scratch. I redesigned the load distribution using a dual transfer system that spread the weight across every support column, so no single point would ever carry more than it could bear. I drafted new blueprints. I annotated every change. I wrote a 7-page technical memo explaining the problem and the solution in language so clear a first-year engineering student could follow it. By the time I looked up, it was 4:47 in the morning. My coffee was ice cold. My back ached. My eyes burned from staring at calculations for 7 straight hours. But the work was clean. It was precise. It was elegant. The kind of work I used to take pride in before grief turned everything inside me gray. I left the entire package on Meredith's desk with a sticky note. Found a critical issue. Fixed it. Details inside. G.H. Then I drove home, showered, and came back in 3 hours later like nothing happened. I didn't hear from her all morning. Around noon, Derek leaned over and whispered, "She's been locked in her office with your file for 3 hours, door closed, blinds shut. I've never seen her like this." "Probably drafting my termination letter," I said. He shook his head slowly. "Nah, I walked past earlier. She wasn't angry. She looked shaken." At 2 p.m., my desk phone rang. Her extension, 2 words. My office, now. I walked in, and the room looked like a command center. My blueprints were spread across every surface. My technical memo was open, bristling with yellow tabs, and Meredith was standing behind her desk with an expression I had never once seen on her face. Not anger, not ice, something raw, something she clearly did not want to be feeling. "How long did this take you?" "All night." "Why didn't you call me?" "Because it needed to be done, and I knew how to do it." She opened her mouth, closed it. Her jaw tightened like she was physically wrestling the next sentence into submission. "This work is exceptional, Garrett. This redesign is better than anything I've seen from a senior partner, let alone," she stopped herself, "let alone the worst hire you've ever made." I said it calm. No venom, no self-pity, just truth hanging in the air between us like smoke. She flinched, and I mean flinched, like something inside her had been struck. She didn't apologize. Not yet. But she looked at me differently after that. And when the city engineers reviewed my redesign that Friday and approved it without a single pushback, one of them looked at the dual transfer system and asked, "Who designed this?" Meredith paused for half a second. Then she said, "Garrett Hollis, my structural lead." Not her employee, not her hire, her structural lead. But even after that, even after the approval and the new title and the shift in her tone, I couldn't stop hearing those words. The worst she ever had. They echoed at night when the apartment was too quiet. They echoed in the morning when I knotted my tie in the mirror. They lived in the space between who I was and who she'd told 14 people I was. And then came the evening that cracked everything open. Late October. A Tuesday. The anniversary of Elliot's death. Nobody at the firm knew my story. I kept it sealed behind professionalism and quiet. Discipline. But my mother, Margaret, she never let the day pass without calling, and she always called at exactly 6 p.m., the exact time Elliot was born and lost in the same breath. The office was nearly empty. I was at my desk pretending to focus on blueprints that kept blurring because my eyes wouldn't cooperate. My phone rang at 6 on the dot. "Hey, Ma! Hey, baby, how you holding up?" "I'm okay." "Garrett Allen Hollis, don't you lie to your mother?" I leaned back, pressed the heel of my hand against my eyes. "It's hard today, Ma. It's always hard today." "I know, sweetheart. I keep thinking about who he would have been. He'd be 4 now. He'd be running around, breaking things, asking a million questions. He'd be right here, Ma." My voice cracked like dry wood. "He should be right here." "He is right here, baby. Him and Claire both. They never left you." "Then why does it feel so empty?" She went quiet. The kind of quiet that means she's crying on her end but doesn't want me to know. "Because love doesn't disappear when people do, Garrett. It just has nowhere to go. And all that love you had for Elliot and Claire is still inside you, looking for somewhere to land. One day it will. I promise. I miss them, Ma. I miss them so much, it feels like my chest is caving in." "I know, baby. I miss them too, every single day." She told me she'd lit a candle for Elliot at church. She told me Claire would be proud of me for still getting up every morning. She told me she loved me 3 times before hanging up, because my mother has never said it once when she could say it 3 times. I set the phone down, wiped my face, tried to steady my breathing, and then I heard it. A sound so small I almost missed it, a sharp intake of breath, from the hallway. I turned. Meredith was standing in the corridor, maybe 10 feet away. She'd clearly been walking to her office and stopped when she heard me talking. I don't know how long she'd been there, but her face told me everything. Her hand was pressed flat against her chest. Her lips were parted. Her eyes were wide, not with shock, with horror. The kind that hits you when you suddenly realize you've been cruel to someone who was already destroyed. Her eyes were glassy, not crying, but right on the edge. One more word, and everything would spill over. She looked at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, Meredith Calloway had absolutely nothing to say. Her chin quivered. She turned. She walked quickly to her office, and the door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow echoed louder than anything she had ever said to me. She didn't come in the next day, or the day after. Her assistant said she was working remotely. Meredith Calloway didn't do remote. She once called it a polite word for hiding. But she was hiding now. And I knew why. On the fourth day, while she was still gone, I needed a reference binder from her office. Her assistant said she'd left it unlocked. I walked in, grabbed the binder from the shelf, and was heading out when something on her desk stopped me cold. Next to my Meridian Tower memo was a manila folder I'd never seen before. It was open. Inside were printed articles, pages and pages of them, about grief, about loss, about stillbirth, about how to support someone who has lost a child. She'd been researching me, not my work, my pain. My throat tightened. I started to turn away. But then I saw it. A yellow sticky note in her handwriting, sitting at the edge of the desk. Just 2 words. Baby shoes. The room tilted. She'd seen them. The tiny, hand-knitted blue booties in my desk drawer. Claire's mother had made them for Elliot. I kept them at work because I couldn't leave them in the apartment where the silence would swallow them, but I couldn't throw them away because they were the last physical proof that my son had existed, that he'd been wanted, that someone had spent hours knitting something soft and blue for a boy, who never got the chance to wear them. Meredith had seen those shoes, and she'd gone home and researched what they meant. Not to use against me, not to pity me, to understand me. I left her office, closed the door, walked back to my desk, and for the first time since I started at Calloway and Wren, I put my head in my hands and sat with the overwhelming, terrifying weight of being truly known by someone I never planned to let in. On Friday, an email arrived from Meredith. Subject line: meeting Monday, 9 a.m. No context, no agenda, just a time and a date. I spent the entire weekend turning it over. Part of me expected a termination letter dressed up as a conversation. Part of me expected another cold, calculated correction. But a small, guarded corner of my chest, a corner I hadn't listened to in years, whispered something else entirely. She's going to tell you the truth. I didn't know what that truth was, but I could feel it coming. The way you feel a storm in the air, before the first drop falls. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what Meredith Calloway was about to say behind that closed office door. And nothing could have prepared me for what I would feel when she finally broke down and said the 3 words that changed everything. Monday morning, 9 a.m. I walked into Meredith's office. She looked different. The armor was thinner, hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. Close the door, barely a whisper. I sat down. She looked at me with something raw and terrified. I need to tell you something. Let me finish before you respond. I nodded. I heard your phone call with your mother. Everything, Garrett, about Elliot, about who he would have been. Her voice fractured on my name. And I saw the shoes, the little blue ones. I went home and sat in my car for an hour because my legs wouldn't carry me inside. She swallowed hard, because all I could think about was what I said in that meeting. What I said to a man who buried his child, who watched cancer take his wife, who shows up every day carrying something so heavy most people would have crumbled. And I called him the worst decision I ever made. Her voice broke clean in half. 3 years ago, I was engaged to a man named Julian Cross. He didn't love me. He loved my client list. He stole my biggest accounts and told me I was too cold to love, that no man would ever stay because I make people feel small. Tears balanced on the edge of her eyes. When you walked in, you terrified me. Not because you were bad at your job. You terrified me because you were kind, patient, real, and every day you showed up like that, it reminded me of everything Julian said I'd never have. She walked around the desk, hands shaking. So I pushed you away. I tore your work apart because if I could make you fail, then wanting you wouldn't matter. If you were the worst, then loving you couldn't hurt me. She was fully crying now, mascara running, every wall in pieces around her. That day in the meeting, you'd just presented the most brilliant work anyone had brought to that table, and I panicked because I wasn't just impressed anymore. I was falling in love with you, and then I heard you wondering who Elliot would be at 4 years old. And I realized the man I'd been destroying was already shattered. She sank into the chair beside mine. I'm in love with you, Garrett, and I'm so sorry. Because you are not the worst of anything. You are the best thing that has ever walked into my life. And I almost destroyed it because I was too afraid to let you see me. Silence filled the room like water. I looked at her for a long time. I understood her. Not because what she did was right, but because grief and fear make people do terrible things to the people they need the most. But understanding someone and trusting them are two different things. I pulled out my handkerchief. Claire had embroidered my initials into the corner. I held it out to her. I need time, Meredith. Her face collapsed like a flame being pinched out. What you said reached into a place that was already shattered and ground the pieces smaller. But I see you right now. I hear you. And if this is real, you have to show me, not with words. With time. Yes, she whispered. I swear. I walked out, didn't look back, but she showed me. Every single day she showed me. Coffee on my desk every morning, my name in her handwriting. She made me co-lead on Meridian and told the same 14 people, Garrett's redesign saved this project. He earned this. She started therapy without being asked. She asked to keep Claire's handkerchief a little longer. I told her to keep it. 3 weeks later, I said something I hadn't planned. Elliot's birthday is next week. I usually go alone. If you're not busy, I could use the company. Her eyes filled instantly. I'll be there. Saturday, October 19th. The day Elliot should have turned 4. I stood at his grave with blue hydrangeas, Claire beside him, 2 headstones under an oak tree dropping golden leaves. Meredith walked up carrying a small white box tied with blue ribbon. She knelt in front of Elliot's headstone, opened it. Inside was a tiny ceramic star, etched into its surface. Elliot James. For the mobile, she whispered. I thought he should have one more star. My knees gave out. I hit the grass, and I cried the way I hadn't allowed myself in 3 years, the real kind. The kind that shakes your whole body and sounds like it's being torn from somewhere ancient. Meredith didn't speak, didn't try to fix it. She sat beside me on the cold grass, put her arm around me, and held on through every wave. She didn't let go once. When the crying slowed, she whispered, Thank you for letting me be here. I looked at her and said, Claire would have liked you. She pressed her forehead to my shoulder and wept. What followed was slow and real. Our first dinner that turned into 3 hours of laughter. Her hand finding mine across a candlelit table. A kiss under a streetlight that felt like a quiet promise. Months passed. She restructured the firm so our relationship wouldn't be a conflict. Cost her politically. Did it without being asked. She learned to cook. Burned everything for months but refused to quit. She showed up. Imperfectly, stubbornly, every single day. The nursery evolved, crib became a bookshelf, rocking chair stayed forever, and the Star Mobile now held 1 extra star. Ceramic. Elliot's name. Meredith hung it herself. One evening I found her reading in Claire's rocking chair, lamplight soft on her face, and something hit me so hard I grabbed the doorframe. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. I love you, I said. The book hit the floor. She crossed the room, took my face in her hands. I loved you when you were standing at that whiteboard. I loved you when you handed me your wife's handkerchief, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt it. Then stay. For how long? For good. Above us, the Star Mobile swayed. Nobody had touched it, but it moved, like a lullaby playing itself, like someone, somewhere, was giving us permission. A year later, rainy April Saturday, Maplewood, cemetery. I stood under the oak tree with a velvet box in my pocket. Claire, Elliot, I want you to meet someone. She's stubborn and brilliant and still burns scrambled eggs and once called me the worst she ever had. But she sat on this grass and held me while I cried for you. She made a star with your son's name. She taught me that loving someone new doesn't mean loving you less. I turned to Meredith, opened the box, gold band, single sapphire, blue, Elliot's color. I knelt on wet grass between the headstones of my wife and my son. Will you marry me? She dropped to her knees in the rain, took my face in both hands. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. The rain fell around us like the sky itself was celebrating, and I felt them. Claire's warmth on my shoulder, Elliot's stillness like a breath finally released, 2 stars that had set, making room for the dawn. So if you've lost something so precious the world went dark, hear me. The darkness doesn't last. Love, real love, doesn't. Real. Ask permission. It just waits until you're ready to open the door. You are not the worst. You are not forgettable. You are not finished. Now, sit with this one question. If the person who hurt you most came to you tomorrow, walls down, shaking, and said they did it because they were terrified of loving you, could you forgive them? Or is the wound too deep? Tell me in the comments. Someone scrolling tonight needs your answer. And if this story made your chest tight or your eyes sting, hit subscribe right now. Tap that notification bell wherever you're watching from. This channel is where broken hearts come to remember they're not alone. You're not alone. Not anymore. See you in the next one.